without having to rely upon row column references, screen geometry. And I'm going to show you that as part of the demonstration in just a moment. So keep in mind, what I'm showing you is actually running inside a CICS. HostBridge is actually a CICS application. You install this just like any other CICS application. And I keep stressing this because when I start running JavaScript, there's a lot of confusion about where that JavaScript runs. It's running inside CICS, right next to your applications. So let's hop in and actually start writing a web service. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fire up a 3270 terminal, and we're going to walk through a transaction on the host. We're going to show you a transaction that I'm going to call and utilize via a web service. And so I'm going to launch into my CICS region. If you hear pauses when I'm typing, I found out a long time ago that typing and talking are very difficult for me at the same time. It's amazing that I can walk and chew gum. So let's launch this transaction. It's called Trader. Trader was written by some junior IBM programmer as a CICS application probably 20 or 25 years ago. And it's a really simple application that lets you manipulate and manage a stock portfolio. And so I've got 4 stocks in my stock portfolio. I'm going to select KC Import Export. And there's 3 operations I can do on each one of my stocks. I can get a real-time quote, buy shares, and sell shares. And the information that's provided when I select real-time quote is information about how much stock I own, what the current price of the stock is, what the value of the stock is, name of the stock, and who the owner is of the stock. All of that information is presented to me. But now, if I've got multiple stocks, and I do, I've got 4 stocks, if I want to be able to get the real-time quote for all 4 of those stocks, I've got to walk through a whole lot of screens. It turns out I've got to walk through 18 screens to be able to get the real-time quote for all 4 of those stocks. So what I need to do, what I'm going to do, is I'm going to create a web service that I can call from the outside world, from any standard platform to the outside world. It calls into HostBridge and actually gets that real-time quote. And I don't have to make any changes to the application on the host to be able to do that. So let's see where we go with this. This is Eclipse, and I can't make these windows any bigger, and I apologize for that, but the editor window the text will be big enough that you guys can see. This standard Eclipse, and this is the most current version of Eclipse right now, but we run on older versions of Eclipse. You don't have to be running the most current version. We have a plugin, a HostBridge plugin, that provides connectivity to the host. And that plugin allows me to interact with applications on the host.
Punch list.
So if I walk through this and I open it up, hey Farrell, I'm getting some feedback. I don't know if somebody's mic is open. If I walk through this, I'm able to see what's on my host as far as the web services I previously created. So I can expand this. Now, this is actually connected to my host to a specific CICS region on my host, and I've got 3 regions defined here. I can have any number of regions. I'm able to see what services are on my host and what repositories are on my host. I'm going to be working in HB Script today, the standard repository we distribute with HostBridge. And I have literally hundreds of services that are inside my script repository. And the web service also allows me the ability to exercise my application, my Trader application, on the host. And I'm going to show you that to you in just a second. Before we get to that, let's go ahead and just start creating a script that runs on the host. So let's expand this, and let's create a new file. We're going to call it live demo. And let's just put a simple piece of JavaScript in here. Now, the JavaScript engine that we're running inside the host is actually the JavaScript engine that's in Firefox. We actually ported that JavaScript engine to run inside of CICS. So you can actually cut and paste code off the internet into the editor here, and when you execute it, it's running on the host. So I'm going to just run this hello world, and I say execute there, and we immediately get back hello world down here. This piece of JavaScript was sent to the host, CICS. It was syntax checked, compiled, and executed, and the result of that execution was sent back to me here. I can deploy this as a callable web service by simply, instead of saying execute, I can say make. When I say make, it took this piece of JavaScript, sent it to the host, syntax checked it, compiled it, and saved it on the host. It's immediately callable as a web service. I can come over here to my web browser and invoke that web service I just created. Sometimes I can't type even when I'm not talking. That's a callable web service. Now, it's not JSON, it's not XML, but I did just send a request to my host, and it sent back the results to me here. That ran inside of CICS. But of course, you want to do things that are much more complex than just hello world. We want to be able to call your transactions, your applications inside the host. Now, I'm going to work with a visual transaction. Yeah, I showed that trader. But we could just as easily work with Chimera programs, or we could actually directly read vSAM files, or make V2 calls, or CA datacom calls. Any API that's available to you inside of CICS, we've actually wrappered inside the JavaScript engine. So I can directly read vSAM files, or I can call transactions, or Chimera programs, or I could do all of those things. And we work as you would expect us to work inside of CICS when it comes to MRO, multi-region operation. We will run transactions in remote regions without having to be installed in that region. So we use those MRO links to run remote transactions or remote programs. So you can put us in your environment in the way you would expect us to work. For high availability, for high throughput, performance, etc. You would build us into your CICS environment just like you would any other application that you wanted to have those features available. Okay, so hello world. We got to do more than that. We actually want to run the trader transaction. So how do I do that? Well, like I said, we've created APIs inside the JavaScript engine that allow us to call CICS APIs. And with that statement, I can now run transactions inside of CICS. But what transaction do I run? Well, when I typed it in on the screen over there, we typed in trader. And I navigated through those screens, but how do I know, what fields to fill in, or how to fill in the fields, or what the field names are? We've got tooling for that. So I'm going to come down here. I got to stay in my demonstration region. And I'm going to start the Application Explorer. And with the Application Explorer, I can run transactions just like I was running the transaction on the 3270 terminal, except this is not a 3270 terminal. This is an application written that runs inside Eclipse, but the conversation with the host that I'm having back and forth is actually an XML conversation. You can actually see the XML down here below. The conversation has enough information in this data stream that I'm actually able to recreate what that screen looks like. This is not a 3270 data stream. It's an XML conversation with HostBridge running inside CICS. And I'm actually able to walk through the application just as I would if I was sitting at a terminal. So I can fill in fields, hit the enter key, PF keys, clear keys, etc., and be able to exercise that application. Now, why am I doing that? Why would I want to walk through the application using this instead of a terminal? Well, because I'm getting a lot of extra information that's not available with 3270 terminal. Over here in this left pane, these are the field names that are on this screen, the BMS field names. Now, I didn't have to do something special to the transaction before I ran Trader. We're running against a standard BMS application inside of CICS. BMS maps have metadata in them that tell us what those field names are. And I can actually reference these fields by using the field name. So what field is this right here? Well, I can click on the field here, and it will show me what the field name is over here. Or I can click on the field name, and it will show me the value over here. So I can see every single field that's on this screen. And I know their names. So when I write my JavaScript, I will use these field names to reference these values on the screen. That means that I don't have to be concerned about screen geometry. That means if the field moves on the screen, someone comes in and edits the map and moves things around, or they add new fields or delete fields that I'm not using, my service will not break because I'm not reliant upon screen geometry. I have real field names when I'm accessing the applications on the host. Okay, so now I've got field names, and I've got some navigation here. And the Application Explorer also gives me the ability to save this entire session. So when I go to here and I get out of my application and I close it, it wants to save it. I say yes. It's going to use today's date as to save. I say, okay, that's fine. Up here in my captures is a new file, which is the screens I just walked through with all the same information is available to me here. Now, typically, if I'm writing a service at a customer site, I would sit down with a domain expert. Usually, that's not going to be the COBOL programmer who wrote the transaction. It's going to be an operator who uses this application every day. The hardest part about creating services is not learning JavaScript or interacting with HostBridge. The hardest part about writing services is understanding the applications on the host and how they work. And who knows those applications better than the operator who deals with them every day? Nobody. So being able to interact with those applications and knowing how those applications behave day in and day out, what error conditions arise, what messages can I expect on the screen, is the most important part about creating web services, and it's the hardest part. Because when you create your web service, you really have to account for all the things that might go wrong as part of the standard operating of any of these applications. If you put in a bad count number, what happens? If the account number branches based upon business logic, you put in one account number and it executes one set of transactions, it goes one way, or another account number, it goes a different way. You have to know all of those things, and you have to deal with them inside your JavaScript. It's not as hard as it sounds. The hard part, again, is understanding what occurs inside the application. Okay, so I've got this recording of my session. I know how I got in here. I typed trad. So how do I navigate through this? I'm going to split my screen right this way. So I have this. Now, I know that kind of got small. Maybe if it's going to be small either way. Maybe if I split it the other way, it'd be a little bit less. No, it's just as small. Let's go ahead and split it this way. All right, so now I've got my navigation over here. Let's go back to the very first screen where I typed in trad. Now, how do I navigate in here to be able to run this transaction for my JavaScript? I'm going to say HB set HB_tran ID. Now, this is a HostBridge operation that says I want to start a transaction. Of course, all of these are documented on our wiki, wiki.hostbridge.com, which you can navigate to right now if you choose to. It's open for anybody to view. Okay, with those two statements, I have launched the trader transaction. When I execute this, I will be sitting on this screen right here after these two statements have executed. Now, there's a way that I can check to make sure I'm on that screen. I'm going to skip that for now. We'll come back to that a little later. But there's a way I can check to make sure that I'm on the correct screen as I navigate through this process. So I'm now on this screen right here where I need to be, and I need to fill in this option field. Well, how do I do that? And I'm going to put a 1 in there, right? And I'm going to hit HB enter again, so I'm going to use cut and paste. With those two, I'm now on the next screen. And on any of these screens, I can retrieve values off the screens. I can set any of the fields on the screen. I'm just doing one field here for both of these because that's all I need to do to navigate through this. So now I need to navigate to this field right here. This field is called up to. Okay, so I'm seeing a pattern here, so I'm just going to cut and paste both of these. And this is called opt to. And I want to set it to a 1 because I want the real-time quotes. And I can see that's what I did on that screen, so that's okay. So now I'm on this screen. And on this screen, I want to extract out some data. So I can extract data off the screen by doing a get field value. So I'm going to say write line hb.getFieldValue. And I got to put the field name. I'm going to extract. Let's extract the company name. That's going to be called Comp41. Now, case doesn't matter on field names. It does matter most in JavaScript almost always, but for field names on screens, it doesn't matter. So with those statements, I have navigated into my transaction. I'm extracting this field out, and I'm going to output it. And you know what? I can test as often as I want because I can actually execute this by just doing a right mouse click and saying execute. When I do that, let's scroll up here. There it is. I get KC input export. This piece of JavaScript was sent to my host. It was syntax checked, compiled inside of CICS, and it was executed, and it was sent back to me. Here are the results of the execution. Real time. I just got data out of my host. Now, obviously, we're going to do a whole lot more than just get one field out, and we don't want to hard code in company numbers. We need to supply some input for that. But you can see that we're navigating in right now. Let's finish the navigation process, and then we're going to come back and start flushing some of this out so that we can get field names in and get output. And obviously, we don't want our output as just straight text. We either want a JSON output or an XML document output, maybe a SOAP, something else. So we got to work on our output and how to get the input in. And we might also want to navigate through more than just one web service. So let's see what we can do here. So first off, let's finish our navigation. Whenever we get to this point, we want to actually navigate back to the first screen again. So I hit PF3 to get from here to here, and then I hit PF3 to get from here to here. So let's navigate back out again. So I'm going to say HB run, and all I'm doing is hitting a PF key, so I don't have to do the set statement. So I have to hit PF3 key twice. So I'm just going to copy that and do it twice. That gets me back to this screen right here. Now, if I was all done, I'd want to clean things up and delete my session. Now, when I ran this a second ago and I didn't clean up my session, it left that session in flight out there. It's like I abandoned the terminal, right? Except there's no physical VTM session or anything like that. It's a bridge facility inside CICS. But I left that out there. Now, by default, it will time out and delete itself after 5 minutes of inactivity. But if I have thousands or hundreds of thousands of requests coming in an hour, then leaving those sessions abandoned out there could be bad because they do consume resources. Not a lot, but they consume some resources to leave that session out there. So we want to be good citizens, right? So we want to clean this up. So I'm going to say HB run. And I want to get out of my application. Now, on any screen, you can hit PF12 to exit an application. So I'm going to say HB underscore AID equals PF12. That exits the application. And I also want to pass in a parameter that says, okay, now delete the session too. And again, all of these directives, these host bridge parameters that I'm putting in, are described in the wiki. And there are a lot because there's a lot of different things you can do with a transaction. Okay, with that, I've exited my application with the PF12, and I told HostBridge to go ahead and clean up that session immediately instead of wait for it to clean up after 5 minutes. With this, I've navigated in, got my data, and I've navigated out. Again, I'm out. Let's just go ahead and run it again. It's not going to change the value here. It's going to say exactly the same, except now I know I cleaned up my session. There's so much more we want to do, though. We want to run through a bunch of transactions. We want through a bunch of companies, I should say, and we want to get the data out of each one of those. And we want to parameterize this stuff so it comes in as a parameter as opposed to hard-coded values. So first off, what do I want in my output? Let's just create something, a template, that's going to hold what my output's going to look like. So in my response, I want to have the quotes I'm extracting. Whatever quotes I get over here on this screen right here, I want to have all of those. And I could have more than one. So let's call something called quotes. And that's going to be an array of quotes because, again, I can have who knows how many of those. And I want to know the status of how I ran. Did I run into an error? Did I have a problem? So let's create a status block. And it's going to be another JavaScript object. let's count how many transactions we executed. So we know how many transactions ran throughout our entire process. We're going to set that to 0 to start with. Let's also see how long we took to run. Let's get an elapsed time. Now this would be the time from when the service starts to the service ends. We'll set that to 0 again as well. And if we have any errors, let's stuff them into another array. We might have a number of error messages or something we want to keep track of. All right. So this is what I want out of my service. Okay. Now, right now, I'm not filling any of this in. Let's go ahead and fill this in with this value down here, right? And actually, we're going to want more than one value here, right? We're going to want more than just the company name. So let's take care of that as well. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to delete the rest of this line. So let's gather that data in quote before we put it into my response up above. And so I'm going to want the user, let's call him the owner. I want to say HB, I can do a paste on that. And the owner is called user41. So we'll change this to user. Put a comma here. And let's copy this several times. Okay, so we know we want the company name. We'll just call that name. And that was comp41. What else do we want off this screen? Let's get this, the current value, or current share price. It's called share now on the screen. SHR. But I'm going to call this price. We're going to want the number of shares I hold. That's called held. And I like held, so we'll keep that name. And we want the value of those shares, and it's called value. I like that name too. We'll just use that on both ends. Okay, so with that, I have the values I want off the screen. I need to stuff them into this place right here. So it's in JavaScript, it's going to be response.quotes, and that's an array that I'm putting it on. So I'm going to use a push. So I'm going to say response.quotes.push_quote. So far, so good. But now, okay, so I took out my write line, so now I can't see how it's running. I can't see the output. We need to write this out. And we may want to write this out as XML, or we might want to write it out as JSON. Well, how would I write it out if I wanted it as XML? Okay, so I've got a utility that already does this, and it's part of the standard host bridge distribution. So let me go grab the utilities and include them as part of this before I do this. I've got two utilities. And you can create your own libraries, functions, and reuse those libraries over and over again. These are just some functions that we distribute with HostBridge because customers are always doing the same sorts of things. So I'm going to get that, and I'm going to get my debugging module too at the same time. Okay, with those two things, I've imported, required, a bunch of pre-compiled, pre-built functions that I can now reuse over and over again. That is, if I spell it right. So I want something out of common out here that already produces XML for me. So now you can produce your XML to look however you want. This is just kind of a generic way of producing XML. JS2XML. And what I want to output is response. And with XML, I've got to have an outer tags to wrapper the entire set of XML. So I'm going to call that getQuote. Now, if I've done everything correct here, this should now produce XML output. So let's run this and see what happens. So with that statement right there, I get my status block, I get my quotes, and it shows all those values that I'm pulling out. Very cool. So far, so good. Again, that's all hard-coded values. I'm still only getting company 1, and I'm only getting 1 company, and I'm not passing anything in. But, you know, what happens, though, if I don't want this as XML? What if I want it as JSON? Well, what would that look like? Instead of saying JS to XML, I would say to JSON string. And for JSON, I don't need that outer tag. So I could just say comma to JSON string. I'm going to run this. It's going to produce 2 sets, both XML and JSON at the same time. But at least we can see what that looks like. So here's my JSON output. And here is my XML. So how do I control this? Let's write a service that does both. Or by that I mean I can select whether I want JSON output or I want XML output. So let's put some if blocks around here. So what do I want to do? Let's say if input type equals XML, then we're going to produce XML. And it will say else it's going to be JSON. All right, so with this, we're able to get either one, but I have to have something called input type that says whether it's XML or JSON. All right, so let's go up here and I put this in an object because not only is type something we need, we also need to know what company we're doing. So let's go up here, and we're just going to hard code this for right now. So I want type equals, not equals, XML. Did I have that in uppercase or lowercase? I probably should proper case that, but I won't worry about it for right now. I'm going to just use uppercase. So type is this, and company is 1. That's the company I want to select. So with this, if I change this right here to be input.company, okay, so I've kind of parameterized it a little bit. Still not getting input from the outside world, but we'll get there. And I say execute on this. Let's see what happens. I got a missing semicolon before statement on line 21. So what did I mess up? Oh, I got a comma right there instead of a semicolon. So the error messages are pretty good. It's JavaScript error messages, line 21. Execute it again. Okay, so I got XML. So now if it's not XML, anything other than XML, it's going to be JSON. So I run it again. Now I get JSON. Cool. And what about if I want company 2? Execute that. Class and legend. All right. So now I've selected my input and output, at least via parameters here. We really need to externalize this. Okay, we've got enough code in here now. We need to really start hardening this up. Instead of just kind of going along to get along here and putting all this in line, we need to create some functions in here, some methods. We need to start cleaning this up. So I'm going to start down here, and I'm going to create a function called, and the format of the functions, what you call them, how many functions you create, that's entirely in your control. This is just how I do it. So inside initialize, I want to get, I want to start my transaction. So let's move this up into here to start my transaction. I want to get my input. So I'm going to copy input right here. Now I'm going to make, this is considered bad form, as it is in most languages, but I'm going to make input a global variable. Just because I don't want to worry about passing it just at the moment. So I'm going to declare it globally. and then I'm going to set it. Response is already a global variable because it's outside any functions. Okay, so with that, I've got my input, and I started my transaction. After I do initialize, I need to have a main program, a main function. And inside my main function, I'm going to have, well, let's have all of this. That's going to be inside my main. And then at the very end, we want to clean things up, so we need to have a terminate. I'm going to put my terminate up here. All right, so now I've kind of got things in functions a little cleaner. Still got a ways to go, but we're getting there. So inside main, I got to call main. Otherwise, nothing's going to execute when I run this. So with this, nothing should have changed. Oh, wait, but I'm not calling initialize and I'm not calling terminate. So now I got to call initialize. And at the end of this, I got to call terminate. Okay, so with this, nothing should have changed. Everything should still be running like it is. I've got XML company 2. Let's see what happens when I execute it. I'm still getting glass and lugid here. Excellent. Okay. So I wanted to make sure that I could do more than one company here. Right now, this is only doing one company, only the company that's supplied here. But I really wanted this to be such that I can do this in a loop and do any number of companies depending on what's passed in. So let's change, first off, let's change this input to be an array. And so I'm going to put all 4 of my companies in there, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I want to change my main routine so I iterate through all 4 of those companies. So I'm going to have to put something in here that allows me to do that. So let's do a for loop. So we're going to iterate over the input companies. So input, now it's really companies now, isn't it? So let's change this to be companies. And this is going to be companies, but it's going to be a specific one. But we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, with that, I now have a for loop. We will iterate over all of these things. And I got to fix my indentation. I'm kind of OCD when it comes to making sure the code looks right. So here, I'm iterating over companies, and I got to change companies here to be it's an array. So what happens now is it's going to iterate over companies. It's going to grab each company one at a time, walk through this process, and then these 2 PF keys are going to back it back up to that first screen again, and then walk through the next company until it finishes that process and goes to terminate. So let's see what happens when I execute it now. Oh, check it out. So we've now just went through all 4 companies, Glass and Lugit, Headworth Electric, etc. I've not got my statuses filled in. I don't have a transaction count or elapsed time. Let's fix that. Let's see how many transactions we just ran. So up here in my terminate, let's see how many transactions we ran. And there's a property that sits off the HB object. Actually, there's not a property that sits off the HB object that counts transactions. So I could write something that counts transactions, or I could use another function that I have as part of HostBridge, part of these common utilities up here, that will add a property to the HB object that counts transactions. And to get that, I do that. That calls that function out. Automatically will now get will automatically count transactions every time I do an HB run. And while I'm at it, let's turn on some debugging features too. Now with that, I should be turning on, it will turn on debugging if a flag is set that says that debug needs to be on. So now I should be able to get my transaction counts, and with this I should be able to get my, it should automatically do some debugging for me if I have the flag turned on. But we were doing transaction counts. So let's see, HB come and run. So down here on my terminate, I'm going to say HB, nope, I'm going to say response. Dot, and I think I called it status, yeah, status, and then tran count. So with that, I should have now transaction count. Let's run it again. Write a little bit of code, run it. Write a little bit of code, run it. It's the easiest way to go. Look at that. I ran 18 transactions just now. 18. What about elapsed time? So we found that JavaScript did not have timing that was exact enough for us. It only goes down to milliseconds. So we wrote a wrapper for an assembler command that gets the time in microseconds. So this will grab the current time in microseconds and stuff it into start time. Then down here, when I'm filling out my response, I'm going to do math on that. So I want to do HB dot minus, let's run it again. Elapsed time. Now that's 161 milliseconds. Now I'm running on an emulated ZOS system, which means I'm running on a big PC. So 161 milliseconds for 18 transactions on my big PC. In your mainframe, this will run probably 30, 40 milliseconds, maybe less. So I've got, oh, I must misspell elapsed time. Because I shouldn't have two there. I'm not going to get wrapped. Yeah, I did. Okay. SEES. Anyway, so let's go ahead and okay, I'm sorry, I have to fix it. ELAP. Elapsed time. Let's execute it again. Now I've only got one. It may be misspelled, but at least it's only one. And the guys in the office will tell you that I'm a terrible, terrible speller. All right, so I've got these, but I want to be able to pass in from the outside exactly what companies I'm doing. Right now, I'm simply just doing those hard-coded for companies. And that's no good, right? And I also want to pass in whether I'm getting it as XML or I want the output to be JSON. So instead of getting the input, I'm setting the input here. I need to get the input from a parameter passed in from the outside world. Now, after I add this in, I'm going to have to start running my service from the outside world because now I'm passing parameters in. I've got to actually execute this from the outside world. I won't be able to do an execute anymore like this because I got to pass data in. But first, let's get those parameters. Now, how do I get those parameters? Let's see. Well, HostBridge has functions that are supposed to do this kind of thing. We have a method called request HTTP that has the ability to get values off the query string. So this right here is what we need to have. So I'm going to copy this, HB request HTTP get value, name it valued with a string or a query string. So that means that if I write a query, I make the call is going to look something like this. My host name is Hugo. Port number. And I'm going to store this in the HBUtils script repository. I'm sorry, HBScript script repository. So with that there, and I'm calling this live demo. So if I want to pass parameters in, I put a question mark in, and I will put in companies equals, let's do it like this, 1, 2, 3. And a second parameter is going to be type, and anything but XML is going to produce JSON. So I'm going to say XML on my test. So that's how I'm going to call this. And actually, if you have a web browser handy, you actually, let me undo that. If you have a web browser handy, you can actually call this as well. You have to use the external name for my host, which is I think, no, that's not it. I lied. It's demo.hostbridge.com. Right? Yeah, demo.hostbridge.com. You can actually put that URL in your browser, and you'll be able to call the web service I'm writing. Now, it's going to error out right now, or not give you what you expect, because I've not coded up these parameters yet. But you can go ahead and do it if you want. All right, so let's see what happens. So that's how I'm going to call it. I copied that, and then I never pasted this value in, so let me copy it again. And we're going to get these in input. So instead of setting these values this way, I'm going to say this is going to be called companies. Now, the value comes in, but it comes in as a string. So this actually will be a string. I need this to be an array. So I'm going to do dot split, and I'm going to split on a comma. What split does on a string in JavaScript is it creates an array. So it will split this up by commas and put each one of these different ones in a different element of the array. Okay, so that gets me the companies. So now I need to be able to get the type. Nope, I just saw that I didn't close companies in quotes. That would have been an error. But now, if they don't supply a type, what do I want the default to be? Well, the default's already set, right? Default set down below where we say if they don't supply anything, or if it's not XML, then it's going to be JSON. So it's JSON by default. So with these two things, I should now be getting my input from the outside world. Now, up to this point in time, I've been saying execute. I've not been saying make. The difference between execute and make is that make compiles and saves the script on the host and does not run it. Execute just sends it to the host and executes it, does not save it. So I got to do a make now. So now I've done that make. I should now be able to call this from the outside world, supply these two parameters, and I should get back the results from my make. Now, there's different ways I can test this. I have HostBridge supplies a little test harness that allows you to be able to call things this way. So if I want to call it this way, I say live demo, and I'm going to pass in companies equals 1, 2, ampersand type equals XML. Oh, XML has to be uppercase. And you'll see this debug on here at the very end. Now, when I added this debug option over here on my script, at the very top, when I added this right here, it automatically now will check to see if debug on is on the query string. If it is, it turns debugging on for this execution. So when I execute this, let's see what happens. Let's see if I get back results. I did get back results, but because I don't have a header in my stream that says this is XML, I can't use the XML button. We'll fix that header, but I did get back the proper results. Very cool. Very cool. I now have these results. I can now, if I don't say XML, it should come back as JSON. I'll just say this. I send it, and looky there, there's JSON. Now, our little online test harness here does not format JSON properly. So we could also make these same calls using Postman. And I know this is a little smaller. Let's see. I think I pasted that over here someplace. So let me paste this in here. Okay, so now I need to supply 1, 2, 3, and I don't have supply type, but I'm going to. I'm going to say XML, and I'm going to send this. Oh, and I get an error because I did not supply credentials. I should have talked about credentials before now. How is authentication being performed? How are you controlling access to this? Hostbridge does not change the way your application runs in any way, shape, or form. By that I mean we're not running a super user. We don't have special authority when we execute. The credentials that we run under on the host are the credentials you supply when you request a web service to run. That's done through a mechanism called a basic authentication header. We support any of the authentication mechanisms that CICS supports. That means if you want to use X509 certificates, we use that as well. Okay, so it ran. I got back information. I still have not got my XML headers appropriate, so we need to go in and take a look and find out how to fix that, because my header doesn't say XML, but we can fix that as well. All right. We're starting to get tight on time, so I'm going to go a little faster. All right. Navigating in, doing our stuff. I really should wrapper this whole process in a try-catch, but because we're getting close on time, I'm not going to do that. I would have a try at the front and a cat. Oh, hell, I'm going to do it. Can't help it. I gotta do it the right way here. And I'm going to close my try out, and I would have a catch. And I would take some action there on my catch, and then I would have a finally. And finally means that this piece of code always runs, even if there's an error up above. So I'm going to always execute my terminate, no matter what. So with that, and I'm not going to put my errors catch in here because we've got a few other things we need to do. So I'm passing in my values. I'm getting my information. Oh, we never checked what screen we're on. How do I know what screen we're on? Again, part of this functionality we imported here from my common utilities gives me the ability to add a BMS map name here at the end of this. Now, where am I going to find out the BMS map name? I can get the BMS map name here from the Application Explorer. So this screen right down here, you are not going to be able to read this probably, but down here at the very bottom is the map set, trad BMS, and the map set T002. So this map set is called T002. I come over here and I'm going to add T002, and with that, it's going to make sure that that's the map set or the map that I'm on when I get to this screen, when I execute this HB run. If it's not, it's going to throw an error. That error is going to go up here and go into initialize, and then get caught down here in the catch. I'm just going to do a right line of e.message. Let's do that. Normally, I'd have a little bit more code here to properly format my error message into my output up here. But for right now, actually, all I have to do is just say response dot status dot, was it errors? It is errors. Dot push e. That should be enough to actually push my error onto my error stack. So let's make this. Oh, I said execute. I say make. Let's make this and run it again to make sure I haven't broken it. It didn't break, but now let's create that error. Let's go up here and change this to be in the wrong map. It's not called T00, so I'm going to do a make on it. Run it again. And I did get my error, but I have a different error that I'm not capturing. Okay, so we've got another error that I got to capture someplace else. is undefined on line 42. 42, input.type is undefined, and that's because I'm erroring out before I create the input. Initialize is inside my try catch. Let's try this again. It's probably still going to error out. Nope, I didn't. Okay, so look here. Expected map T00, but received map T002. So if I don't end up on the right map, I'm now throwing an error and I'm catching it. One last thing I want to do is I want to make sure, before I wrap this up, I want to make sure that my output here has the proper header, so it's recognized as XML. And again, I have another thing in common. They will produce the proper headers, so I don't have to do it by hand. I need to do the same thing down here for JSON. Like this. And I do a make on this again. And I test it one more time. I still have a little undefined here I need to take a look at. That was probably the reason for my error message that I was seeing before. I'm doing a right line someplace else that I'm not catching. I don't know where it's at. Not going to worry too much about it right now. So I've just written a service that goes out and exercises my application. It's going through 16 or 18 transactions whenever I specify all 4 companies. So if I come over here and specify all 4 companies, execute those, I'm running 18 transactions. Oh, I still have my T002 map error. Computer fix my T002 map error. Go to my test, run it again. I just ran 18 transactions. Very, very cool. 18 transactions in 138 milliseconds. And it's not limited to that. Of course, it doesn't know that I'm running the same ones over and over again, but I can actually put additional ones in here and run through a lot more than just 18. And with that, I ran through 50 transactions on my screens, and I did that in 54 milliseconds. And I can produce JSON just as quickly as I produce XML. But I simply change in one parameter, and now I have JSON output. I think that's all there is. I think we'll wrap up with that. And Farrell, are there questions I can answer?
Okay. I've unmuted the phone, so if you have questions, fire away. And I also had a few that were posted in our Q&A and chat windows.
Okay.
Any questions from an attendee audience? Okay, let's go to some of the questions that were posted. Can we use ZOS Connect to do things James is demonstrating?
Well, we've actually just written a fairly long blog post talking about ZOS Connect and HostBridge. And we really are doing different things for different purposes. ZOS Connect does not do screens. It does Chimera programs real well if you're doing a single Chimera program. But it doesn't do very well when you're trying to orchestrate them on multiple Chimera programs or visual transactions. But read the blog post.
And that's just, our website is hostbridge.com, and then there's a tab for our mainframe integration blog. Next question. This is something that has been used for RPA-type applications.
RPA.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I know what RPA applications are.
Okay. If you're on who posted that question, can you give us robotic applications?
Robotic. Well, we're standard web services, right? So anybody can talk to us from any platform as long as you can make a web service call of any sort. There's nothing special about us. So if your devices make calls to can make HTTP web service calls, they can talk to HostBridge. We have customers that build trucks, large trucks, Peterbilt trucks. They can't make trucks if HostBridge doesn't work. So we have, we have manufacturing, but probably our biggest industries are going to be in the financial, insurance and banking and those types of things. But we have all sorts of companies using us for all sorts of purposes.
Okay, James, we're just right at our stop time, but I want to quickly mention that we have recorded the webcast, and we'll email the slide deck and a link to the recording to everyone who's attended today's public webcast. So if you want to watch it again or socialize it to others, please do so. James covered a lot of territory in a short amount of time. If you have some specific questions or want to drill down on specific requirements or maybe a use case, we'd love to talk about our product and how it can be used. So just let us know, info@hostbridge.com, or just call in, and we'll be glad to schedule a call and discuss in more detail. We do offer free proof of concepts. So for U.S.-based customers, we'll come on site for a 3 to 5 day pilot application workshop to show HostBridge working with your applications. We'll write 2 or 3 services for business processes with your application, very similar to what you saw James demonstrate with the trader application. And so just let us know if you want to discuss doing a poll with HostBridge.